Good afternoon, everyone. Can I get a check if the people online can hear us? I see some raised hands, so I'm going to take that as yes, you can hear us. 19. All right, we have good participation online. So for those of you who are in the room, you should know that we are joined by about 100 or so people online. So this conversation is both meant to be quite conversational, but also it is being recorded. So, and there is a group online to make sure that you are comfortable saying things for that audience. Some laughter, but I just feel you can never be too careful these days. I appreciate that, Keith. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Anjali Tripathi. I have the privilege of working as part of NASA's exoplanet exploration program over at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is the NASA center that Caltech administers just down the road here in Pasadena, California. And so this is the first time that we are having this prototype of a workshop. We're making PROTO stand for Professional Tools and Opportunities, because this week you're going to learn all about direct imaging for young Jupiters, habitable worlds, an Earth-like planet. And I think there's amazing things that you're going to uncover once you stop being blinded by the starlight and can focus on what's hidden and trying to learn more about that. And I think one of the things that I've been really lucky to experience is being at a place like JPL, and some of the places I've been is learning, how do you get a job, right? How do you get to be one of the people who is up here speaking to you this week? And so I'm hoping that much like being able to see what's hidden in the glare, you'll get a sense of that today. It's going to be a really flying overview of a lot of material. And so if you have questions and want to dig in deeper, perfect. That is exactly what you were supposed to do. And so the motivating factor here is once things go dark, is to talk about three little letters that we're really fond of at the moment: H, W, and O. So today for Proto, we'll start with the who. So who are the people who are giving these talks? How did they get to be here? So we're going to start with a career panel up here, surrounded by our lovely panelists. And then we're actually going to talk about how do you put this all together, right? Where does a telescope in space come from to do all of the science you want to do? So Hannah Jane Condell will talk to us about working with NASA. Tiffany Kataria will talk to us about the decadal survey, and Keith Rogan will share mission formulation with us. And then we'll start to make sense of these letters, H, W, and O, which are our favorite three letters. In NASA, we love putting acronyms for everything. So that stands for Habitable Worlds Observatory. And David Ciardi will give us a glimpse of how did we get there, the historical context. So throughout the day, we're going to have these talks, and then we're all actually going to move over in about 2.5 hours to the Hamitman Center, and you'll actually be able to break up into small group chats with each of the speakers. So you'll see that each of the speakers will have a little bio page like this before they give a talk. You can take a look at it. This is not a test, but it's just an opportunity for you to think about questions, both about the contents of what they say, but also if there's something about their background that you find particularly salient. And so this is an example for me. I am not up here teaching you about direct imaging these weeks. I'm a theorist. I did study protoplanetary disks, which is why proto with the planet is very near and dear to my heart. But I won't subject you to that. But just to say that we will have those speaker chats after this. So I hope you are all excited. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. So one, if you're in the room, please reminder to silence your cell phone if you haven't already. And if you are joining us online, please use the Slack channel. If you're in the room, you can also use the Slack channel, but there's actually a microphone over there that you can come up and ask questions during these sessions. So I encourage you to come up to the mic. The online questions will be handled by our lovely student, Grace. So we will try and get everybody included. And the most important announcement, Ellen points out that restrooms are down one level and water fountains are outside, but please do not eat in this room or drink anything other than water. We will have coffee when we go to coffee chats later, but just water in this room for now. Any other housekeeping bits? All right, we are 3 minutes on schedule, ahead of schedule, which never happens in conference land. So we're going to just actually dive right in because we will probably want that time back later. So hopefully we will be joined by our fourth panelist in good time. He's coming from across town, which in LA traffic can be quite the challenge. So we will start there. So just to say that when you think about what happens to becoming an astronomer, it seems like a really straightforward path. You go to school, Okay, you go to college and you maybe study something related to astronomy, and then you go and get a PhD. You go and do a postdoc, and you maybe do that a couple of times and get a permanent position. Magic, done. There are a lot of steps there. And so these lovely people will help demystify that process. And you were really lucky to have this amazing cast here with me. I will take a seat with them, and hopefully everyone online can see us. But they have experience from different stages of the process, as well as knowing all of the ins and outs. So just seated to my left is Dr. Sarah Blunt. Sarah is a postdoc at Northwestern, a CIERA fellow. She's going to be moving over to UC Santa Cruz as an NSF astronomy and astrophysics postdoctoral fellow very soon. So Sarah has that recent experience of having graduated from this fine institution a couple of years ago. Congratulations, with her PhD in astrophysics, and is now experiencing that next stage. So she can give you that recent perspective. For an international perspective, we have Dr. Beth Biller joining us from the University of Edinburgh. It's very easy to think about astronomy as just happening here in the US, but it's actually a remarkably international subject. And we have centers all around the world in Europe. So Beth brings experience from being a postdoc in Germany. She's faculty in Scotland. So she can tell you what it's like making that move from the US overseas. And I think that's something that's really important. Like, I was lucky enough to go to the UK for a degree, and it really changed my outlook on things. So we're glad to have Beth here. And then to Beth's left, we have Dr. Don Gelino, who is the newly appointed manager of JPL's exoplanet, or of NASA's, exoplanet exploration program. We're very excited to have her here. For many years, Dawn, you will have seen as part of the Sagan Workshop, because she has been at Caltech as part of NEXI, the NASA Exoplanet Science Institute. So she brings all of this experience of what does it look like working in these different institutions. And on top of all of that, Dawn is like the guru of the NASA Hubble Fellowship Program. So that postdoctoral program, right, that Beth did, that Pradip did when he gets here. And so you can find out all of the ins and outs of what that's like. So we'll dive into some questions. But before we do, why don't we start with Sarah, and we can just go along. What did I not cover here in this flying overview that people should know about you that's important for understanding either tips for their own success or just to understand you? What drives you?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. But...
No, it's not. Yeah, but I'll trade you. But
yeah, I think you covered it. I don't know that I have anything else to say to give an overview of the perspective that I'm speaking from.
Okay.
I guess what I would say is, especially for people who are not US based, if you have questions about kind of how things work in Europe, or in particular the UK, I'm very happy to answer them and kind of compare and contrast the experience in different countries.
I think the one thing that's not on this slide, actually there are a few, but the main thing that's not on the slide is I'm a mom of 2 teenagers. So I like to make sure that we all keep the human perspective in mind too. The science, we love the science, we love the technology, we love the discovery, but when it comes down to it, we're human beings. And so, there's a lot to think about when you're thinking about your career path, and, whatever decision is right for one person may not be right for another person. In fact, it's probably not. So just to keep that in mind, and work-life balance is hard. I often don't get a lot of sleep because my kids come first. And so I do the things I need to do with them. I make sure I do that, but then I also have to make sure that I do the job that I'm paid for, the job that I love. So I think that's it, Anjali.
Thanks. And since we're short on mic batteries, we're going to play pass the mic back and forth, if that's okay. So hopefully everybody can hear us, and we will make sure there's a mic back in time for questions. But let's go back in time, because I think we have, so just a show of hands by everyone who's in the room, who is an undergraduate? Okay, we've got some in between, maybe congratulations in there. Great. And who's a graduate student? A lot of you. Okay. And postdoc? Woohoo! And after postdoc? We welcome everyone here. This is meant to be a very inclusive conversation. So I think since we have folks who are at the undergraduate level, let's go all the way back in time with that time machine and think about graduate school and that experience. So Sarah, you actually sat on a graduate admissions committee, right? So why don't you give folks an overview of what that looks like from that perspective? Because you know that you have to put in this application, but what happens on the other side of the table?
Yeah, for sure. So I think
Test.
graduate committees are overall looking for your potential as a researcher. So I also want to say I'm speaking from my own perspective. I was only on one graduate admissions committee one time. So this is what I'm taking away from that. But yeah, we were evaluating applications holistically, meaning that we didn't care that you had like one bad grade one time or something like that. It was about putting together this overall picture of your potential to be an excellent researcher. Some of the things that went into making that evaluation were your statement of purpose, where you talk about the research projects that you've done in the past, if you already have research experience, and basically just your interests and skills and what led you to apply to grad school. So I particularly, when I was reading those, I was looking for evidence of scientific creativity. So meaning that somebody did like the N+1 step in their research project. So it wasn't that scientific creativity specifically was figuring out something additionally to what you were given. And that didn't necessarily have to mean like I came up with a whole new direction for my project and I completely changed it. We all know that undergraduate research is mostly like helping out with a project that's sort of already set. But it was sort of those little bits of taking the next step and showing that initiative. And then of course, looking for things like skills. So what kind of computer knowledge do you have? Do you know the necessary sort of physics and astrophysics to like hit the ground running in the program? And also, are you going to be a good community member was something that we were also really interested in.
I see a lot of head nodding. Also, can people hear me with this mic? Okay, great. So now you all can share that mic. And if you want to close the space while we make up for Pradip's absence, feel free to do that. So thanks for that perspective from that top, Sarah. And I don't know if, sorry for the echo. Beth, if you want to share a little bit about what is different between an international PhD and an American one, and sort of, do you have Americans or applying to programs in Edinburgh?
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of international students apply. Okay, so one of the key differences between North American PhDs and European PhDs, there's a couple. European ones, you usually do them after you have a master's. Often that's an integrated master's that comes along with your bachelor's, sometimes not. Whereas in the US, I think it's more common that you do the master's and the PhD as the same thing. Our admissions process is also very different. Before I get that too, it's also European PhDs are considerably shorter. The typical PhD timescale that your funded timescale in the UK is usually about 3.5 years. People usually take maybe more like 4. I think in mainland Europe, it's usually about 4 years. So it's definitely not as expansive as a US PhD. The admissions process is also a bit different and really varies from institute to institute. So now I'm going to tell you what our admissions process is at the University of Edinburgh. And this is just what we do. Everywhere is going to have a different way of doing this. Another difference is that in general, you're going to be recruited into a specific project. So I think in a lot of US PhDs, you might actually do several projects with different supervisors. You usually just one supervisor in a European PhD. So for our process, students submit a 1-page anonymized application that has some information about grades and background, and then they have about half a page to present a figure and some details about research they've done. So supervisors then have advertised a project, looks through that and are allowed to choose a certain number of people to interview. So they interview those people, the supervisors, as well as a panel interview the people. And it's a complicated horse trading process than what happens next. So it is a little bit more, I guess, granular and less looking at the holistic whole of things, at least with our particular process.
Thanks, Beth. And Dawn, you touched on the aspects of life, right, that we don't often talk about. So what were you thinking about when you were choosing where to go for graduate school and where to apply?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So my career, I did not end up where I thought I would be. But I'm very happy where I am. So that's fine. You know, when I was in grad school, it was very much if you are a successful astronomy, researcher, then you go, you get your undergrad degree, you get your graduate degree, you do a postdoc, maybe two, and then you become a professor somewhere. So I got my undergrad degree in physics. I got my graduate degree in astronomy, and then I got a CAS postdoc fellowship at UC San Diego. And partway through that, I could talk about the different types of fellowships and postdocs, but that particular one, the prize fellowships, generally it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. You haven't been hired to work on one particular project with one particular person. You're hired because you are you and you do what you do. And so I worked on black holes, low mass X-ray binaries. And so that is what I used to do, not exoplanets. There are a lot of things that are similar. So a lot of transferable skills, which is great. And so, partway through my postdoc, it kind of clicked, like, I don't know, like, I love doing the research. I like going to the telescope and collecting data. I was an observational astronomer. But I didn't really want to teach. I mean, I like teaching. I have no problem with teaching, but I didn't really want to be a professor and just, and I didn't, I don't know. It wasn't for me. And so I started looking around. I also had a two-body problem at the time. And I ended up being, networking. I ended up talking to someone at a AAS meeting. Actually, it was David Ciardi. It's all his fault. And being talked into applying for a job that I thought I would never actually, have the skills for or get. At the time, it was advertised as, running meetings, being a staff scientist at what was then the Michelson Science Center, part of IPAC at Caltech, and and doing things like running the NASA Keck TAC, and running this workshop, which used to be called the Michelson Summer Workshop, and things like that. And I was like, I've never done anything like that. I can't do that. But so I was talked into it. I applied, and I got it, and that was stepping outside of my comfort zone. And it turns out I really liked it, and I was kind of good at it. And so 20 years later, well, I guess, I don't know, 13 years later, I became deputy director. I kind of worked my way up, became deputy director for the NASA Exoplanet Science Institute, because that changed from the Michelson Science Center, had many different names throughout the years. And then just recently, this position at NASA's Exoplanet Exploration Program opened up. I was encouraged to apply. Again, thought it was outside of the scope. It was outside of my level, my area of comfort. But I did it. I said, okay, I'm going to try. And much to my surprise, I was chosen. Not to anyone. Thank you, Hannah. Hannah is our program scientist at NASA headquarters for the Exoplanet Exploration Program. So thank you very much for that. I've only been there 2.5 months, but I feel like I'm finally starting to settle in, which is really great. And everybody there is so welcoming. And so this is not where I thought I was going to be when I, was an undergrad or was in grad school. And I think the stigma, sorry, I'm talking too much, but I think the stigma for having to stay, in academia and become a professor, and if you don't, then you're a failure, that seems to be lifting. At least I hope it is. And I hope I can serve as an example of, there are other options. There are other options in academia. There are other options out of academia. And so you have to do what's best for you. Sorry,
no, that's great. I think there are a lot of important nuggets there. And so I'm going to just throw this open to anybody. Are there things, so when I was a grad student, I remember thinking, I never want to code again after this is done. Oh, I think some people have also felt that way. Okay, great. And so if you had told me that, in 2020, I would be coding in my free time, I would have thought you were crazy. So I will say grad school was also a time of a lot of stress and anxiety. Can anybody on the panel share a little bit about, something that they were maybe worried about in grad school and how you dealt with that?
Yeah, I can start off. I didn't know what I wanted to do after grad school, and I think that's a really common sentiment. And I was really stressed about making sure I was prepared for any of several different pathways that I wanted to take, which is stressful because you preparing for one pathway is hard enough. I also wanted to, the second half of the question, I think, was how you dealt with that. So one thing that I did that I'm really happy that I did was between my third and fourth year of grad school, I did an internship at Google. And that was really helpful to not only see what it was like working in industry, which was one of these other pathways that I was considering, but also to give myself the confidence that I could apply for a job like this. And I went through the process when the stakes were lower and it was just thinking about an internship rather than a whole job. I was very glad I did that. When I was applying, I didn't know anyone else that had done it. But of course, as soon as I got this position, everyone was like, oh, that's so cool. I did that too. And I learned about 5 to 10 other people that had done internships during grad school. So that's what I'll say about that.
Beth, Don, would you like to add anything?
Okay, I guess one challenge I had maybe towards the end of my PhD was actually a fair bit of imposter syndrome, which I think is a very common experience. And, as a PhD student, you do feel like you're proving yourself. But the thing about imposter syndrome is a lot, if not most, very capable people I know have it. So I was able to, kind of rationalize and realize, okay, this is just a thing I'm feeling. It's fine. I am capable. But certainly, in the process of applying for jobs, that bubbled up.
And Don, is there anything you want to add on that one?
I don't think I want to take up too much.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And again, I remind you that we'll have question time here and also coffee chats later. And so you are welcome to dive deeper. I just wanted to point out that graduate school is not all rainbows and unicorns all of the time. And you can still get a job without feeling that it's rainbows and unicorns all the time. So I'm actually going to shift a little bit to the postdoc process. So this slide, we'll just put it up in the background, gives you some nuts and bolts of that. But Dawn, since you were actually on, all things NHFP, can you tell us a little bit, just sort of walk us through what are the different types of fellowships and what makes a compelling application?
Okay, I will. Please cut me off if I'm talking too long. And I actually am cheating a little. I have notes only because I've given hour-long talks on just one of these questions.
Sure.
Please forgive me if I take a peek at my notes just to make sure I'm not getting off track. But so there are, I guess, 3 main types of postdocs. There are the prize fellowships, like I mentioned before, kind of choose your own adventure. You're not tied. Well, your application talks about the work that you've done and that you want to do going forward. You want to do this project in a finite amount of time for this fellowship. But you choose, and you also choose who you work with. And, in some cases with the NHFP, that person.
And what does NHFP stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry, the NASA Hubble Fellowship Program. Thank you. So in 2018, there used to be the Hubble Fellowship, the Einstein Fellowship, and the Sagan Fellowship, which I used to run the Sagan Fellowship also. And in 2018, they were all merged together into the NASA Hubble Fellowship Program. So I believe, Beth, you are a classic Hubble Fellow. Yes. Pradip, who's not here, is an NHFP Einstein Fellow. And so there are different flavors of the NHFP. So I am one of the 3 science leads for the NASA Hubble Fellowship Program currently, until NextSci hires my replacement, in which case then I can roll off and do my job full time. I need you to do this, Chaz. Okay. So that's kind of indicative of a prize fellowship. There are government fellowships like NASA fellowships, NSF fellowships, the NPPs, NASA postdoctoral program. Those are typically take place at NASA centers. And so you get a feel for what life is like at a NASA center. And those, I believe, you are typically tied to, an advisor and a specific project. I think that the advisor picks. And then there are the more numerous grant-based postdocs out there. And so, that is, someone in an institution, one of Rose's award, they got JWST time and they have all this data and they need help working on it. And so they put an ad out and then you're working on specifically that program with that person for, that determined amount of time. And so those are 3 different types of postdocs. Let's see, what makes a good application? I'm trying to keep this short and I'm happy to talk to anybody at the coffee hour. And I'm also going to be around all week. So I'm happy to talk to anybody then.
Yeah,
Or
all
on
of the
Slack.
people on the panel here are around all week. So some of you, I think, have already signed up for lunches with Beth and Sarah, but lots of opportunities.
Yeah, I don't think I have a lunch because I'm not officially a speaker. So,
Dawn
but
is
I'm
too fancy.
around. And also you can DM me on the Sagan Summer Workshop Slack. I am on the Slack, so you can find me there as well. And so 2 main things for fellowship and just, for any type of proposal you're writing, whether it's a fellowship, a job, a telescope proposal, whatever. 1, read the instructions and follow the instructions. Everybody laughs. It seems like a no-brainer, but oh my goodness, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have run a lot of TACs because I also used to run the NASA Keck TAC. I've done Kepler K2 panels. I've done, I have seen a lot of proposals in my last 20 years. And the ones that stick out badly are the ones that don't follow the instructions. Even if it says 12-point font and you want to cheat a little bit and make it 11.5. Oh no, after the reviewers have read, 10, 20, 50 proposals, they will see that your font looks different than everybody else's. And they'll know that you didn't follow the directions. And they want somebody who's going to, listen and do what they're supposed to do. Creativity is great, just not at that point. Okay. So that is number 1. Number 2 is connect to the big picture. It is almost 100% likely that the person or the people that are reading your application do not work on your niche of science that you are proposing to do. So, because if they do, they're probably conflicted. So you want to make them care, right? You want to connect to the big picture and make somebody, if you're an exoplanet person, you want to make a cosmologist say, hey, actually this is a big problem and, it does need to be solved. And hey, look at this person has the skills and the plan to solve that problem. And so connecting to the big picture is really, really important. If you can't sell what you want to do to the person that is reading your application, then your application is not going to get selected. And so one way to do that, and then I'll pass the mic. One way to do that is to make sure that you get feedback on your application, right? Send it to somebody who works in your field, send it to somebody who does not work in your field. Let them look at it. And what's obvious to you may not be obvious to others because you're so in the weeds. You're looking, you're working at this every single day. And, you might show it to somebody else who hasn't looked at this or ever maybe, and they may be like, I don't understand. Like, what are you talking about? What are you trying to say here? So I think that is super important. All right. I have more, but I'm going to stop there. I think. Did I miss any part of that question?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, Beth, do you want to just comment a little bit on, you moved from the US to Europe. So what did that look like? Why did you decide to go to Europe? How did you think about where to apply?
All right. So I did my first postdoc at University of Hawaii and then my second at MPIA in Heidelberg. And to be honest, I applied a whole bunch of places and I got one offer at MPIA, which, in the end was fantastic. But
Only one.
Yeah, that was the one offer I had for you. It was also, yeah, it was like during the global recession, so it was a weird time. Although we've obviously had some much weirder times since then. But yeah, so in the end, it was a really great experience, and I really liked living in Germany. And it was a great institution, but it was a daunting moment to be like, if I want to stay in my particular field, I will now move to literally the other side of the world.
And then you stayed.
Yes.
Okay. Any comments on sort of what that transition was like? Was it easy to go from an American institution from Hawaii to MPIA to Edinburgh?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ways that people do science are fairly similar. The way the funding works is a bit different, but I would say the experience of working in a big research institute internationally is not that different from working in one in the US. My experience again in terms of what faculty job I ended up taking is I applied a lot of places, and Edinburgh is the one that worked out. And again, I really love Edinburgh. It's a lovely city and it's a great university. So it all ended well.
Awesome.
I guess one critique I have of our field in general, though, is it is problematic that there is pressure in order to stay in the field that you do have to make big moves.
Yeah.
And the US is maybe unique in that it's like maybe the one country that you could literally stay in the same country for your entire career. I think internationally, for most places, you do end up having to move countries at least once.
Yeah. And I know we have a lot of international participants, especially online, joining us. And so I know Pradip isn't here with us, but, he did his undergraduate in India, then came to the US for graduate school and stayed here. And there are people that you'll hear throughout the week, right? Like, for example, Emil did graduate school in the Netherlands and then came to the US for a postdoc. So people move in and out at various stages throughout their career. So Sarah, you are a postdoc right now. So tell us, how did you think about where to apply? Like, how many applications did you put in? And who helped you throughout this process?
Yeah, I think I would say like a quasi non-traditional way to get to where I am right now. So I decided I was originally the proposal that I put in for my PhD was a 5-year plan that I was going to take 5 years to graduate. And as I was starting my 4th year, I decided for personal reasons that I wanted to graduate in 4 years instead. And I realized that I couldn't apply. I didn't think I had enough time to finish my PhD and apply for postdocs that same year. Luckily, I had a really good relationship with a postdoc that I had been working with who just got a faculty position. And he and I had written a grant together and he got the grant. And so he was like, well, I'll just hire you as a postdoc. This will be great. And I'm like, okay, that's amazing. That, solves this problem. I can focus on finishing my PhD this year and I don't have to apply for postdocs. And that was Jason Wong at Northwestern, and who's great. I spent that 4th year like focusing on writing papers and finishing up everything. And CIERA ended up wanting to like encourage more exoplanet folks, and so they ended up offering me this CIERA fellowship, which was really wonderful. So basically, I just fell into it, and I got very lucky. I didn't think very much about it. It was just about where Jason was. And it wasn't necessarily, I had a great experience at CIERA, but it wasn't necessarily like a decision. But the sort of caveat was that my partner's job is in Southern California and I wanted to stay in Southern California. Sorry, this is really complicated.
This is how everybody's career works.
Yeah.
Right? It's very complicated and it requires lots of personal decisions. And so you might be on the other side thinking, oh, I'm anomalous, but actually you're not.
Yes. And a lot of luck and being in the right place at the right time. So my partner's job was here. I wanted to stay living in Southern California. And one of the things that Jason and I had worked out originally was that it would be fine for me to work remotely for a year. But CIERA was really trying to bring people in person. And so they said, we negotiated a little bit and they said, all right, you can work remotely for the first year, but if you want to keep the fellowship in years 2 and 3, you'll have to come in person. And so I was like, all right, that's not super ideal for me because my partner's here. So I think I'm going to apply more broadly for postdocs. So I've been a postdoc now for a year. And then in the fall, I applied and that was my sort of big, apply for many postdocs type of experience. I applied for a bunch of national fellowships and then I applied for institutional fellowships as well. So at like particular places in California that I wanted to be. And I was lucky enough to get the NSF. And so I didn't have to worry about continuing to apply. Typically grant-based postdocs, the deadlines are later than for national fellowships and institutional fellowships. So that's my, I guess I can talk about the decision of like where to apply. So it was very like driven by location for me since I wanted to stay in California. So I only applied to places that were like fellowships in California that I could be at and that were nearby to places where my partner could easily work. And then marginalizing over that, I wanted to be in a place where there were exoplanet people that I was interested in working with and, being able to expand my sort of scientific horizons as well. So that was my thought process.
No, that makes sense. Do any of you want to share a little bit about who helped you with the postdoc application process? And, was your thesis committee helpful or not helpful? What was your advisor like? So anybody who wants to take that one.
Can I actually
go back.
a little bit of a different perspective?
Sure.
So US postdocs are kind of separated into prize fellowships and other sorts of fellowships. We have fellowships in the UK as well, but interestingly, they tend to go to more senior people. So in the UK, a typical path is often you'll end up with a grant-based fellowship as your first postdoc or two. And then later you might look into something like the Rutherford Fellowship or the Royal Society University Research Fellowship. So the structure is a little different in the UK. And I think it's also different in Europe, but I'm not entirely sure because I'm not as familiar with that. In terms of what helped with the postdoc application process and who helped my mentors in general, but get people to read what you have written. Dawn said that already, but really you definitely want other eyes on your postdoc applications and people who aren't in your field.
Sorry, what?
Helpful people.
Oh, right. Who helped? So I was lucky. I had, actually, I guess. So my advisor on paper was not actually the person that I worked with the most. The person I worked with the most didn't quite have the standing or the title. So I got my PhD from New Mexico State University. I decided to go there because it was the only grad school I got into. And I applied to a whole bunch also. And it was lucky because I wanted to be an observational astronomer and they had a lot of telescope time, direct telescope time. So my advisor basically taught me, you need to talk to people. And I was so shy. I mean, painfully shy. And people don't believe that because now I do what I do, but my job kind of forced me to do what I do now. But so again, if you are shy and you're worried about talking to someone who is more advanced in their career, remember they were once in your shoes. I was once in your shoes. And please don't be afraid to come talk to me or to talk to them. I guess the help I got from my advisor was mostly connections and just, kind of beating it into my brain. You have to talk to people, even if you're uncomfortable. And that helped me so much. I went to actually every job I've ever gotten was from some interaction I had at a AAS meeting. I'm also a AAS vice president. I have no idea if that's actually, or if that was on the slide. So you can always ask me about AAS stuff as well.
Yeah.
So I'm a little biased, but truthfully, every job I got was from networking at those big meetings, the American Astronomical Society meetings. You never know, I'm going off topic a little, but when you're standing in line to get coffee at that meeting or especially like a smaller meeting that's more, focused on your science, say hi to the person next to you. You never know if you're going to be in an opportunity, have an opportunity to hire you in the future, or maybe or later in your career, you're going to have an opportunity to hire them. So be nice to people. It seems like a no-brainer, but smile. Be nice to people, and just say hello. The worst they can do is look at you and walk away, and that's on them, not on you.
Yeah, please.
A really small comment I want to add is that I think When I was younger in grad school, I always thought of networking as talking to people who are more senior than me, but I've realized more recently that networking is also talking to people that are at the same stage as me and more junior than me. And those connections are also incredibly helpful.
That's why we're giving you food before and after this, right, to talk. So we're going to do a couple of speed questions so that we can make sure we have time for questions here. So anybody who wants to answer these, jump in. So one of them, and I know these are like questions we could answer for hours, so I apologize for rushing you. So one is, how did you decide who your referees were going to be, or so your recommenders were going to be for your letters, either for postdocs or permanent positions? Dawn.
Okay. So I did not have a vast network, so my decision was kind of easy. But what I want to say is, from the perspective of running the NASA Hubble Fellowship Program, the best letters come from people who know you well, not necessarily the ones that people know well. Does that make sense? So your letter writer needs to know you and what you work on. You don't want to pick somebody fancy or somebody really well known just because they're well known and you think they might say nice things about you, right? Your letter writer has to speak to you, your skills and your strengths. They know them better than someone who doesn't know you.
And I think what I would say is also, it's more important that they know you, but you should give them the information they need to write a good letter. So, send them an up-to-date CV, let them know what are the research accomplishments you're most proud of. If there is a particular position that you're particularly interested in, give them, I want to go to this university because I definitely want to work with this person, because that's going to lead to a stronger letter because they're going to be able to say, we think that they'll work really well with so-and-so, as opposed to so-and-so is applying for position X at Y. Here is a completely generic letter. One thing I'll also say, I've seen both in the PhD and the postdoc admissions process at Edinburgh, at least, we are trying to really downweight reference letters and only look at them very late in the process because of the issues with potential bias with reference letters.
Great. Is there anything you want to add to that, Sarah, or should we move on to the next?
Well, maybe add a fun fact, which is that the NSF AAPF actually doesn't require recommendation letters. So you definitely need recommendation letters for the vast majority of things, but not literally everything.
All right. And I just want to put in a plug. On the right side of the screen, you see that it's got a link or a URL for nhfp-equity.org. And so I just wanted to point out that the NHFP fellows started this resource a couple of years ago, I think in 2020, where you can go and actually see the full application materials of past fellows. So you can scroll down. You can also apply for a mentor, someone to walk you through this process. Are you involved in this?
Yeah, I'm a mentor this year.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this process for anybody who might be interested.
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm talking about the right thing. This is the AMP Up.
Yeah, this
okay,
is, yes.
Okay, cool. So AMP Up, this is the first year I'm involved in it. So I'm like just getting involved, but the idea is to pair people who are applying for postdocs with, I think it's prize fellows specifically.
Yep.
So
And not just from NHFP.
Right.
It's been broadened.
NHFP, 51 Peg B, NSF, others.
And I saw a couple other folks from like Brinson Fellows and a couple others. So you get, so I have 2 mentees, I think this time. And so I'm gonna start meeting with them and, talk to them about the process of applying for postdocs. So I think it seems like a really great resource. It's not something that I was actually aware of when I was applying. So I'm excited to get involved.
Yeah, and the materials go back quite a ways. So again, talking to us is not just day to day here, but it goes on. Dawn, you look like you want to add something quick.
Yeah, quick. I just wanted to say the criteria specifically for the NASA Hubble Fellowship Program has changed over the years. So looking at the most recent applications is the most helpful.
Yeah.
Sure.
When writing your postdoc applications, if you're interested in a particular fellowship, it's a really good idea to find someone you know who has that fellowship and see if they're willing to share their application with you.
All right, we're going to just quickly go to talking about different institutions where you can end up later, right? There's many different career trajectories. Today, we focused more on the sort of traditional path in astronomy. Like I didn't do a postdoc, they all did. And so I don't know if maybe Beth or Dawn, if you want to just talk a little bit about what your experience has been like at an international institution, right? I think you talked a little bit about this earlier, Beth, but or maybe Dawn, of a university versus a science center versus a national lab, right? So these different places where you can end up.
What are our options?
Your options, right? Because I think it's easy when you're in school that you just keep going in universities, right? But you can end up in a university abroad. You can end up in, a space telescope or something.
And I would say, so university abroad compared to US universities is probably not going to be that much different as an experience as a postdoc, for instance.
And for a permanent position.
For a permanent position, okay, I guess some key differences. So US faculty have to raise their own summer salary, I think, right? And that's not common in the rest of the world. So we actually do get paid for the whole year. I would say that that's one of the key differences. Again, I'm not, this is the UK perspective. I'm not entirely sure how they, different countries in mainland Europe work differently as well. We have similar teaching loads, I would say. The way that we allocate PhD students is very different. So in the US, if you're faculty and you want to hire a PhD student, I believe you need your own grant funding to do so. Whereas we actually have centralized positions for the entire department that are allocated in a communal way. So that's another difference. But again, this is specifically UK. I know some other countries, so France, there are university positions with teaching, but then there are these CNRS positions as well that are kind of national positions. They're at universities, but they're nationalized. And they have what sounds like the most intense and stressful application process I've heard of since, where people usually go through it several years and you interview more than 1 year. And it usually takes, I think, on order 3 or 4 years to get it. Sorry, this is just the grad bag of thing. Some other places, Germany is a tricky one because you usually don't get a permanent position until you are pretty much at the full professor level. So you have to be getting fellowships and kind of group leader positions there. So yeah, those are what I know about differences between the US and other and faculty positions elsewhere. With the only one that I can tell you is absolutely correct is the UK.
Okay. And Dawn, the different places you can work.
Sure. Okay. So, well, there are academic institutions, and I think everybody knows about them. There are science centers, like IPAC here on campus, like Space Telescope Science Institute on the East Coast, and those are more focused. Usually, if you are a staff scientist at a science center, then you get a portion of your time to do science, but the rest of your time is used for functional work, for working on programs that your science center has gotten funds to do. So for instance, when I got here to Caltech and I started working for what was on the Michelson Science Center, I was part of the, it wasn't called Science Affairs team, but it was the equivalent. And what that meant was I was involved in running, administering the time on the administering NASA time on the Keck telescopes in Hawaii. We would run these summer workshops. We would be in charge. And when I say we, it was me, and then it was me and Ellen. And Ellen's been here for 16 years too. And so she can probably give a really good talk to her too, if you want, or you should. And she also, before here, she was at JPL. And so, so you do functional work and you do science. At NASA centers, you're definitely doing a lot of functional work, although it's kind of a similar setup to the science center. Let's see, I think
that's pretty
industry,
good.
Yeah.
And all of the institutions in blue are institutions I just pulled from the Sagan registration list. So that means that there is someone at this conference that you can find either in person or remotely there. So you can reach out to the network, ask them questions. And there are lots of other institutions there. So with that, I'm going to actually open us up for questions. If anybody in the room wants to hop over to that mic and ask a question, or that one, please do so. While you're getting up, I'll just quickly answer a couple of questions that we have online. but please don't be shy and come up. So one of the questions we got is which of the fellowships are open to international folks? And I think for postdocs, they're all open. Is that right?
Except for the
Nope.
NPPs, I think, actually.
That's right.
Do you know that? Okay, sorry. She's at headquarters. Foreign nationals can apply for NPPs, even though they're at NASA centers. Okay. Okay.
Get in.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yes. So international,
So,
that's good.
international, yes, is you can apply to pretty much anything.
Great. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm just going into masters and I had a quick question about the fellowships you were talking about. What would y'all advise me to do to prepare to, submit applications to fellowships and all in my postdoc through my masters?
So I would reach out and talk to the people you might want to work with. Tell them your ideas and, and see what they think and, start a conversation there. I'm sure there are other things you should do, make sure that you know the motivation behind the project that you want to do. I don't know.
And actually, Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about a post-bac program, right? And different things you can do beyond?
Sure. Yeah. So I also did a post-bac. So that was a year of research between undergrad and grad school. There are a couple of post-bac programs that you can apply for specifically. And then you can also just the same way that you might expect to get networking can also get you post-bacs as well. And that was how I got my post-bac position. It was like purely doing research for a year before I started grad school. So also to make sure we understand your question. So you're currently in a master's program and you're thinking of applying for...
I'm currently applying a master's and asking what should I do during my master's to get ready to apply for fellowships?
Sure. And do you mean graduate fellowships or postdoc fellowships?
Postdoc fellowships.
Postdoc fellowships. So I think like getting your PhD and trying to work towards your PhD is sort of a prerequisite for applying for postdoc fellowships. And then just in general, I think really good advice for preparing to apply for postdoc fellowships is just do a lot of research. What these folks were saying too about understanding the motivation behind your work, I think is also really important.
David?
So I have a comment on applying for master's programs and going past your master's programs if you're interested. There is a group of graduate students in the US who've sort of organized themselves, folks who have gotten their master's degrees and have had specific things that they've had to deal with, either going forward or leaving the field, or whatever. I can't think of the names of that group and the people in charge at the moment, but I will send that to the organizers, and then you think about it, and then it'll just go through Anjali. But there's an entire group of folks in the last few years who really thought through this. They wrote a white paper that went to the decadal. It was reviewed by the decadal. It was part of the whatever that subpanel was called. I forgot what the name of the subpanel. Anyway, there's a whole group of folks who've given us a lot of thought. And so I'll try to get that information to Anjali so that you can, okay.
Yeah, and I should point out that while all of us up here have PhDs, like I actually did a master's program after college separate from my PhD program because I wasn't sure if I would continue. And I know a lot of people who stay involved in astronomy in different ways, right? Who do a master's, who don't. I also want to just comment on the post-bac program. Like when I started my PhD, there were 2 people in their 40s in my PhD program who had lived other lives. One of them had been a professional ballet dancer who had gone back to school. Another person had just kept doing research but never had a PhD and finally decided to do that. So we'll go there and then we'll take the online one from Grace. So please.
So maybe you talked about changing your topic throughout grad school, and some of you talked about going to, like, if you're doing a master's and you go to a PhD, that also changes. Can you talk through if anybody has had a big change in research topic throughout their career? Like, how did you make that choice? And like, what was it that kind of signaled to you that you needed to make a big choice and that was the right choice for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't know that I've ever made a really big switch, but I have made like I've sort of like started investigating different areas that have sort of blended together over time. And that's, for me, that's how I like prefer to think about starting to like switching to work on a new topic. Is not necessarily that I'm like leaving my old topic behind, but I'm switching my focus, and those blobs of of experience and understanding will eventually like run into each other and start to overlap again. And that's been pretty consistent. Like I've studied different things that I was like, oh, this is totally unrelated. I'll never use this again. And then I've been surprised that it actually has ended up being interesting and useful to what I'm doing.
Okay, so big science changes. So this is what, I mean, the nice thing is like you can still kind of do this in your PhD. Like it is definitely harder to switch once you get into postdocs. It is possible, but the problem, you know, and I think it's actually maybe more possible if you have a really good justification for like a fellowship. But if you're applying for a postdoc with a specific person and they have a specific project, and they are choosing between people who have experience in that particular field and someone who's trying to transition in, it does mean you're in a bit of a disadvantage. It doesn't mean that you won't get it. But if you want to make that change, then you're going to need to really justify why you will be successful in your new research field and how skills from your old research field would help with that.
Yeah, definitely. I second what Beth said. So I did have a big science change. I used to work on low mass X-ray binaries. Now I work on exoplanets, although now I'm a manager, so I do none of my own science, but I enable a lot of science. So I've changed a lot in a lot of different ways. And so finding those skills that are transferable. So, you know, I stuck with observational astronomy, and I was an infrared observer, even though I looked at black holes. So that also helped with the transition. And why did I transition? It was mostly because in order to work at IPAC at what was then the Michelson Science Center, I pretty much had to transition. But I welcomed it. And nothing wrong with the high energy field at all. But, you know, exoplanets were, you know, they still are super exciting. And I mean, everybody is going to be here this week because we all love exoplanets. So yeah, I don't know. Basically, you have to figure out what feels right for you. And, you know, if you really love what you're doing, then, you know, you need to sometimes be creative and figure out how to keep doing it. But if you don't love what you're doing, you should definitely, you know, take opportunities, you know, take classes, sit in on, you know, go to more general meetings so you can hear what other people are working on. The AAS meetings are really good for that, not to plug that, but, and, you know, my first year or so in grad school, I actually did a number of different projects. I figured out I hated coding when I spent a summer writing a 3D model of a brown dwarf atmosphere. I don't have the patience to find the little errors that I make when I'm coding. So, you know, experiment a bit, and, you know, and when you're a grad student, that's actually a really great time to do that. As you know, Beth just said, it is a little harder when you're a postdoc, but it's not impossible.
Thanks. All right. And last questions from online. They're great.
Cool. So we had a couple of people online ask a similar question, which was, is how much of an issue is it to have a gap in your resume when applying for PhD or postdoc positions?
So how big of a problem is it? I feel like it's not a huge problem as long as you can explain it, but does anybody have anything else they want to add to that?
I think as long as it's explained, you know, that it's fine. I think so. There are actually a handful of fellowships that are specifically for people returning to astronomy after a gap. So in the UK, we have the Dorothy Hodgkin Fellowship that is like specifically for that.
All right. Anything else online, Grace, that we should talk about, or are we? Because we'll also respond to things in the Slack chat afterwards. So don't worry if you don't see your question answered.
I think some people asking about international opportunities, but I think that already got answered.
All right.
And some people, similar to what you guys just talked about getting into astrophysics later in life. And they're saying how to get into academic careers without going through the postdoc phase, since postdocs are meant for younger people, although you guys have just mentioned some. So
you can definitely be older.
Opportunities that are for people later in their career.
Yeah. So, and I will just point out that exoplanets as a field, right, did not exist 50 years ago, right? So the people who you see at the top of the food chain started somewhere else, did something else, and everything is constantly evolved. Final thoughts here, Dawn.
It's a career stage. It is not an age stage. So that is, I think has evolved over time also, so yes, it's a career stage, not an age. That's why we're not old. Maybe I'm saying this to make myself feel better. I don't know. I am, mid-career, maybe late career now. I don't know, but it's a career stage. So don't be worried about changing what you want to do.
I think you would have a hard time getting a faculty position without having done a couple postdocs, simply because you need the research output, you need the track to be able to show your track record over, I guess, probably at least a decade's worth of time.
All right. With that, I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Again, they are around all week and the rest of the day. So let's give them a round of applause. Say thank you.